On March 20, 1995, Tokyo's subway system transformed from a symbol of efficiency into ground zero for one of the most shocking attacks in the history of Japan. It was just another Monday morning in Tokyo. No one saw the 5 men step inside. No one noticed the plastic bags they carried wrapped in newspaper resting at their feet. And no one realized that in just a few minutes, their lungs would turn to ice and start coughing violently. This is the full story of the Tokyo subway attack. In the late 1980s, Japan saw the rise of a religious movement that promised spiritual enlightenment, but was hiding a secret beneath the surface. At the center of it was Shoko Asahara, a nearly blind yoga instructor who convinced thousands of people he was the second coming of Christ. He would become the leader of the Aum Shinrikyo, a religious movement and doomsday cult who would help synthesize the deadliest chemical weapons in the shadow of Mount Fuji. But to truly understand the full picture, we have to rewind. Before he was Shoko Asahara, he was Chizuo Matsumoto. Born in 1955 into a poor family in Japan's Kumamoto prefecture, Chizuo was the 6th of 7 children. He suffered from congenital glaucoma, leaving him blind in one eye and with limited vision in the other. His parents were struggling to provide for their large family, so they sent him to a boarding school for the blind. It was here that the seeds of his future were planted. In the hierarchy of the school, there was a clear divide, the fully blind and the partially blind. Chitz was among the latter, well enough to exploit the weaker students, bullying, extorting money, asserting his dominance. Even then, he craved power. After graduation, he set his sights on something bigger. He dreamed of wealth, influence, and control, but achieving that in Japan's rigid society wasn't easy. He tried to enter medical school but failed. He tried politics but was ignored. Instead, he turned to alternative medicine and mysticism, and soon, through experience, learned the power of charisma and how it mattered more than credentials. By the early 1980s, he was running an herbal medicine shop, selling fake remedies and promising miraculous cures. He dabbled in acupuncture, qigong, and various Eastern spiritual practices, but his biggest claim was that he could channel divine energy into people only if they were willing to pay for it. Then something happened that changed everything. In 1982, Chitsuo embarked on a spiritual journey to the Himalayas, or at least, that's what he told his followers. Whether he actually went or simply crafted the story later is unclear. But when he returned, he was said to have achieved enlightenment. He had meditated for days without food, had visions of cosmic truths, and had realized his true purpose. He was a prophet. At that point, Chitsuo Matsumoto renamed himself Shoko Asahara and founded a small yoga and meditation school promising spiritual awakening. He called it Aum Shinrikyo. At first, it was just another New Age group, blending Hindu and Buddhist teachings with self-improvement techniques. But as Asahara's following grew, so did his ambitions. He told his students that modern Japan was spiritually bankrupt, that materialism had poisoned the soul of society. Only he had the answers. And as his influence spread, so did his message. Then in 1985, something happened that radicalized him completely. According to Asahara, he had a second awakening, this time in his own home. He claimed he had risen into the air while meditating. In that moment, he said he saw the future, a vision of worldwide destruction. There would be a nuclear apocalypse. Nations would collapse, cities would burn, the streets would be filled with corpses, and in the ashes of civilization, only those who followed him would survive. At this point, it was more than personal enlightenment. He saw before him salvation from Armageddon, and this was where Aum switched completely. Asahara began fusing Christian end-times prophecies with Buddhist and Hindu beliefs. Driven by his God complex, he told his followers that only those who joined Aum would be saved, claiming to be the reincarnation of Christ and the Buddha, who was chosen by divine forces to lead the world through its final days. But if the world wasn't ending fast enough, then Aum would help speed up the process. The group drew in thousands of members, members, from college students to elite scientists, engineers, and doctors, all eager to follow his path to enlightenment. But enlightenment had a price. Members were subjected to extreme rituals, sleep deprivation, isolation, and brutal initiations, all designed to break them down and make them utterly dependent on the group. Dissent wasn't tolerated. Those who questioned Asahara were punished, tortured, or worse. Despite whispers of abuse and disappearances, Aum Shinrikyo continued to grow. It started to draw attention from the Japanese government, yet they hesitated to intervene. At this moment, Aum was officially recognized as a religious organization and enjoyed tax exemptions and legal protections. Asahara had successfully built an empire. Therefore, he turned his attention toward more ambitious goals. Asahara had always claimed to see the future, warning of an imminent war that would destroy modern civilization. He told his followers that Aum must be prepared, for when it came, they had to take control of everything that remained. To make his vision a reality, he needed weapons, money, and total control over his followers. That's when the group's transformation into something truly dangerous began. At this point, Aum Shinrikyo was a society of sorts. It had its own hierarchy that was divided into ministries and agencies, each led by a dedicated and highly skilled member. At the highest levels of the hierarchy sat his most trusted disciples. Hisako Ishii was once an ordinary office worker and became the mastermind behind Aum's financial empire. She displayed an incredible talent for management to the point of amassing nearly $1 billion in assets for the organization. Money poured in from anywhere it could be taken. Members' life savings, family inheritances, and even seemingly legitimate businesses. Nothing was off limits. Asahara's personal belongings became sacred relics, sold at outrageous prices. His bathwater was sold for $1,000. His blood was listed at a pricing of $10,000. That's because their followers believed these items had divine power, but in reality, they were just another source of income. With a workforce of devoted unpaid laborers, Aum ventured into new businesses, fitness centers, real estate deals, restaurants, even babysitting and matchmaking services. They undercut Japan's tech market by assembling and selling computers at lower prices. And then they expanded globally, acquiring a tea plantation in Sri Lanka and a sheep farm in Australia. Using shell companies, they obtained sophisticated technology, industrial chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, many of which would later play a role in their most dangerous ambitions. While Ishii handled Aum's finances, the group also needed someone to oversee its medical operations. That role fell to Ikuo Hayashi, a former elite doctor who had studied at Keio University, one of Japan's most prestigious institutions. Before joining Aum, he was a respected cardiologist and even led a department at a major hospital. But when he encountered Aum's teachings, he abandoned his career and pledged himself to Asahara. Under Aum, Hayashi oversaw medical experiments that bordered between treatment and torture. The cult operated secret medical facilities where members were forcefully drugged, did electroshock therapy, and chemical injections, all under the guise of spiritual purification. They used sodium thiopental, a truth serum, to interrogate suspected traitors so they remained loyal to Aum. Some members were subjected to LSD experiments and extreme physical punishment to break them mentally. Then, the brutality escalated. Aum scientists were working on chemical and biological weapons, experimenting with sarin, VX gas, and botulinum toxin. When they found members who were deemed disloyal or knew too much, they were eliminated, sometimes strangled, sometimes poisoned. Their bodies were dissolved in chemicals to leave no trace. Asahara's vision of apocalypse and rebirth demanded sacrifices, and Hayashi helped make sure no one, inside or outside the cult, could stand in his way. At the head of their weapons development was Hideo Murai, an Osaka University graduate with a degree in physics. His research once focused on studying X-ray emissions from celestial bodies. But under Asahara's orders, he was tasked with creating advanced weaponry to prove Asahara's divine power. They would experiment with earthquake machines based on Nikola Tesla's theories, plasma weapons that could supposedly vaporize people while leaving buildings intact, and other impossible technologies. But nothing worked. Then, Asahara became increasingly anxious. He feared losing control, so that's when he began taking dramatic measures. He detained members who tried to leave, even started abducting those who had already escaped. In recorded speeches, he played footage of global conflicts and warned that Aum was under attack from the CIA, the Japanese government, the Freemasons, and even the Emperor himself. Asahara's paranoia escalated, but his supposed visions of the future remained unfulfilled. Until one day, they weren't. For years, Asahara had preached that a great war was coming, one that would wipe out the world as people knew it. He called it the final battle for Shambhala, a term from Buddhist and Hindu mythology. Shambhala is traditionally known as a mystical kingdom, a utopia hidden beyond the physical world. But Asahara twisted its meaning, claiming it was real. He framed it as a final war that would destroy the corrupt and impure, and that only the most loyal of followers would survive to rule. Despite his claims of divine foresight, Asahara's prophecies had repeatedly failed. He had predicted earthquakes, natural disasters, and global conflicts that never materialized. But one day, everything changed. In 1995, he ordered one of his followers to predict a major disaster using astrological calculations. The follower, more or less making an educated guess, said that a large earthquake would soon strike the Kobe area. But then, 9 days later, on January 17, 1995, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake devastated Kobe, killing over 5,000 people and leaving tens of thousands injured or homeless. To Aum Shinrikyo's followers, this was undeniable proof of Asahara's supernatural abilities. He had foreseen the catastrophe, just as he had always claimed he could. They believed the end times were truly approaching, and only he could lead them through the coming chaos. With this momentum, Asahara declared that the war for Shambhala had officially begun. But there was one problem. Despite his fantasies of godlike destruction, his secret weapons programs had failed. The earthquake generators, plasma cannons, and other pseudoscientific projects had led nowhere. If he wanted to accelerate the apocalypse, he needed to upgrade his weaponry. The Ministry of Health and Welfare of Aum took charge of developing biological and chemical warfare. At their primary laboratory, over 100 scientists worked with equipment worth more than $30 million. Seiichi Endo, who had dropped out of a virology graduate program at Kyoto University, took the lead. He was joined by Masami Tsuchiya, an organic chemistry researcher who had taught part-time before joining the cult. Handpicked by Asahara, their mission was to create weapons of mass destruction. One of their first projects was botulinum toxin. It is derived from bacteria in low-oxygen environments, considered one of the deadliest substances known to humanity. Endo began collecting soil samples and cultivating bacteria to mass-produce the toxin. Soon, Aum had 50 large-scale fermentation units filled with deadly compounds. They put their plan into action, mounting spraying devices inside a truck and driving through central Tokyo and Narita Airport, Japan's largest travel hub. If successful, the attack would have plunged the nation into chaos, but the spray mechanism failed. The toxin was released, but nothing happened. They decided to try again, but this time, their target was the Imperial Palace during the royal wedding of the Crown Prince. Once more, they prepared another truck and deployed the toxin. But just like last time, nothing happened. The botulinum attacks had failed. Frustrated with their repeated attempts, Aum decided on another biological weapon, anthrax. A disease caused by bacteria that naturally exists in soil, anthrax can infect humans through skin contact, inhalation, or ingestion. They decided on the most efficient lethal way, inhalation anthrax. Endo likely obtained a harmless strain from an academic contact still in university. Some say he attempted to engineer a more dangerous variant by merging two non-lethal strains. With this, he scaled up production. To test it, they released anthrax spores from the rooftop of their headquarters. And the result? A foul stench spread through the area. Birds dropped from the sky, and small animals perished. Encouraged by these signs, Aum refined the anthrax into a powdered form and sent a van through the streets of Tokyo, dispersing the deadly spores into the air. Once again, nothing happened. Their attempts at biological warfare were proving to be failures, disturbing yet ineffective. But biological weapons weren't their only option. They had something else in development, something far deadlier. That's when Asahara turned to chemistry. He placed Masami Tsuchiya, a highly skilled chemist in charge of Aum's chemical weapons program. Under his leadership, Masami successfully synthesized some of the deadliest substances ever created: taboon gas, mustard gas, sarin, hydrogen cyanide, and VX nerve agent. But simply producing these toxins wasn't enough. Aum needed to know they worked. So they tested VX on their own followers. Those who tried to leave the cult were executed with it. They also attempted to assassinate a journalist using phosgene gas, a chemical weapon first used in World War I, but she survived. Hydrogen cyanide attacks were plotted in multiple locations, yet each attempt failed due to poor execution. In spite of growing their arsenal, a large-scale attack was still out of reach. They needed a weapon that was not only lethal, but also easier to deploy. Therefore, they turned their attention to sarin gas. Sarin is an odorless, colorless nerve agent that's super lethal. This type of chemical weapon attacks the body's nervous system. Exposure triggers symptoms within seconds, such as blurred vision, excessive sweating and drooling, muscle convulsions, uncontrollable vomiting, and paralysis. In larger doses, the diaphragm freezes and suffocation occurs within minutes. Unlike Aum's previous weapons, sarin had a key advantage. It turned the human body against itself. Aum Shinrikyo purchased a ranch in Banjawarn, Australia, where they reportedly tested sarin gas on sheep. When they saw that it worked, they moved on to human trials. In 1994, in Matsumoto, Nagano Prefecture, Aum members pulled into a parking lot in a quiet residential area, just 37 meters from a small apartment complex. Their goal was to target 3 lawyers who were working on a legal real estate dispute case against Aum. The cult members had a modified truck that contained a heating mechanism designed to vaporize 12 liters of sarin. They set up the device, funneling it through a series of fans. Then the gas spread into the air. But the sarin dispersed, carried by the night air, and drawn into nearby homes by open windows and air conditioning systems. By morning, 7 people were dead. Over 500 others suffered agonizing symptoms, including blindness, nausea, and seizures. One victim remained in a coma for 14 years before succumbing in 2008. None of them were the intended targets, but for Aum, this was a confirmation that ignored any concern for their actions. It simply meant sarin had proven its effectiveness. Now, there was only one logical next step. If a small amount of sarin could cause such destruction, what could they accomplish with a massive supply? It was time to take the operation further. Shoko Asahara ordered Tsuchiya to mass-produce 70 tons of sarin for a catastrophic attack on Tokyo. But then something happened. A chemical spill at their facility led to reports of a strange odor near their compound. That's when the Japanese authorities tested soil samples and found chemical markers linked to sarin production. News outlets began questioning why a religious group would be involved with such substances. Inside the cult, panic spread. They quickly destroyed all evidence, disposing of chemicals, dismantling equipment, and even constructing a false wall to seal off an entire lab. The room was then redecorated as a prayer hall. For a moment, it seemed like they had evaded suspicion. But then, they made another mistake. Cult members kidnapped a man whose sister had escaped the group. They wanted her back because she was wealthy, but he refused to disclose her location. Drugged and held captive, he died of an overdose. A witness had seen the abduction and reported the van's license plate. The police traced it to a cult member. Combined with the sarin soil samples, authorities finally had enough evidence. A full-scale raid was planned, but Asahara was one step ahead. An informant leaked the police's plans to him. He knew they were coming, and he needed a distraction. Therefore, they had to produce a fresh batch of sarin in a hurry. On March 18th, just 48 hours before the attack, chemist Masami Tsuchiya was ordered to manufacture more. But without key precursor chemicals, the resulting sarin was of lower purity, roughly half as effective as the kind they had used in Matsumoto. Also, it took on a brownish tint so it was more noticeable. Instead of a complicated release mechanism, they opted for liquid sarin inside plastic bags. Each member would carry about 0.9 to 1.3 pounds and use sharpened umbrellas to puncture them. Their target was the Tokyo subway system. At 3 a.m. on the morning of the attack, the team rehearsed their roles using harmless water-filled bags. Then, as the city began to wake, 5 men set out, each boarding a different train. Rush hour had begun. The Tokyo subway is one of the busiest transit systems in the world. Every day, millions of commuters pack into its trains, relying on its efficiency to navigate the sprawling metropolis. At peak hours, passengers stand shoulder to shoulder, pressed together in tightly packed cars. Each operative carried a plastic bag filled with sarin, wrapped in newspaper to avoid suspicion. In their hands, they carried umbrellas with sharpened tips. The plan was straightforward. Drop the bag, puncture it with the umbrella, exit the train as quickly as possible, leave the station, and rendezvous with an accomplice waiting in a getaway car. As the morning rush intensified, the 5 men moved into position. Wearing a surgical mask, Ikuo Hayashi stepped onto a southwest-bound train in the Chiyoda line, carrying 2 plastic bags of sarin wrapped in a newspaper. As the train approached Shin Ochanomizu Station, he set one bag down and with a sharp jab punctured it. Then he quickly stepped off the train. Inside the first carriage, the clear, odorless nerve agent started to evaporate. A 26-year-old office worker took a deep breath as the doors closed behind Hayashi. A sharp, inexplicable pain shot through her chest. Her vision blurred. Her throat tightened. She coughed violently, but she had no idea why. Around her, other passengers began experiencing the same symptoms. The train continued its route, stopping 4 more times as the sarin poisoned everyone in its path. At Kasumigaseki Station, the leaking bag was discovered, removed, and taken away by station attendants, unaware of its deadly contents. 2 of them would later succumb. The train continued to the next station, where it was fully stopped, evacuated, and decontaminated, but by then, the damage had already been done. Kenichi Hirose boarded a westbound Marunouchi Line train at Ikebukuro Station. He moved between multiple carriages to avoid suspicion, finally settling in the 3rd car. As the train approached Ochanomizu Station, he placed a newspaper-wrapped package on the floor, recited an Aum mantra, and punctured both sarin packets with his sharpened umbrella, bending its tip from the force. The gas spread rapidly, poisoning Hirose himself in the process. He staggered out at Ochanomizu Station, where an Aum getaway driver was waiting with an antidote. The contaminated train continued its journey. At Nakano Sake Station, 14 stops later, 2 unconscious passengers were carried out, while a station attendant removed the leaking sarin packets, but the toxic residue remained. The train reached Ojikubo Station, the end of the line, where fresh passengers unknowingly boarded the same poisoned carriage. It wasn't until 2 stops later at Shinkoenji Station that the train was finally pulled out of service. In the end, 1 passenger lost their life, and 358 others suffered serious injuries, many collapsing in agony before they even understood what was happening. Toru Toyoda, an applied physicist and devoted cult member, stepped onto the first carriage of train B711T, bound for Tobu Dobutsu Koen. He only had 2 minutes to act. At Ibisu Station, as the train slowed, he placed his 2 sarin packets on the floor, punctured them, and immediately stepped off. The odorless, invisible gas began spreading as the train continued. At Roppongi Station, passengers felt their chests tighten and began opening windows. By Kamiyacho Station, panic had set in. Some passengers stumbled out, coughing, while others remained inside, unsure of what was happening. When the train reached Kasumigaseki Station, the first carriage was fully evacuated, and the train was taken out of service. The attack killed 1 person and seriously injured 532 others. Masato Yokoyama boarded the Ikebukuro-bound Marunouchi line at Shinjuku Station disguised with a wig and glasses. As the train approached Yotsuya Station, he punctured his sarin packets but failed to fully rupture one of them. The gas leaked slowly, and he fled the train at the next stop. The train reached Ikebukuro at 8:30 a.m., where it was briefly evacuated and searched, but station staff missed the sarin packets. It departed again at 8:32 a.m., heading back toward Shinjuku. Passengers soon began collapsing, and by Korakuen Station, attendants found the contaminated newspapers. At Hongo-san-chome, station staff removed the sarin packets and mopped the floor, but the train was still in service. The train continued running until 9:27 a.m., when it was finally taken out of service at Kokai Gijidome Station. There were no fatalities. Over 200 passengers suffered severe symptoms. Yasuo Hayashi, one of Aum Shinrikyo's most devoted followers, volunteered for a heavier burden. Unlike the others, he carried 3 sarin packets instead of 2. As his train departed Akihabara Station, he placed the packets on the floor of the third carriage and swiftly punctured 2 of them before stepping off at the next stop. Within minutes, passengers began feeling the effects. The toxic vapor spread quickly. At Kodenmako Station, one alert passenger noticed the plastic-wrapped packets and instinctively kicked them onto the platform just as the doors opened. The station quickly filled with poisonous gas, exposing waiting commuters. 4 people perished at Kodenmacho alone. Inside the train, a puddle of sarin remained on the floor, continuing to poison passengers as the train continued its journey. By the time it reached Hachibori Station, the symptoms were overwhelming. A desperate passenger finally pressed the emergency stop button at 8:10 a.m., but because the train was in a tunnel, it had no choice but to continue. It wasn't until Tsukiji Station that the doors finally opened. Passengers stumbled out, gasping for air. Some collapsed onto the platform. By 8:35 a.m., the entire Hibiya line was shut down, but for many, it was already too late. Between the 5 affected stations, 4 people perished and 275 were seriously injured. By the time the attack ended, 13 people were dead. More than 6,000 were injured, many suffering from lifelong neurological damage. At first, no one knew what had happened. The symptoms were bizarre. People choking, vomiting, collapsing in the middle of their commute. It wasn't until medical teams identified Sarin that the connection to Aum Shinrikyo became clear. Authorities began investigating immediately. Over the following weeks, police raided Aum's compounds, uncovering a staggering stockpile of weapons and chemicals. Their facilities housed chemical labs and stockpiles of deadly substances capable of large-scale attacks. The group's science minister, Hideo Murai, was publicly assassinated by a Yakuza member in April 1995. Shoko Asahara, Aum's leader, went into hiding. When police finally found him months later, he was hiding in a concealed room within an Aum compound, disheveled and unkempt. Over the following years, Asahara and 12 of his top followers were sentenced to death. After a lengthy legal battle, they were executed in 2018. But the attack could have been far worse. During Aum's previous operation in Matsumoto, the sarin was nearly full strength, strong enough to drift into neighboring homes and cause damage without direct exposure. But for the subway attack, rush production resulted in a lower purity batch. If it had been made to full potency, the impact could have been catastrophic. How did it happen? The Tokyo subway attack was a failure of oversight at every level. Aum Shinrikyo had been granted official religious status by the Japanese government in 1989, giving them tax benefits and reducing scrutiny of their activities. Investigating them was considered taboo. When police finally did take action, they found that Asahara had designed Aum like a machine, operating like a full-scale corporation. Scientists, engineers, chemists, all handpicked to help Asahara bring his apocalyptic vision to life. And the scariest part? It almost worked. Aum was eventually dismantled, its leaders arrested and executed. But that didn't erase its legacy. Offshoots of the cult still exist today under different names, still out there. This was the story of the Tokyo subway attack, a moment in history that should never be forgotten.